Hello and welcome to Reimagining Love. I'm Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Relationships have the power to wound us and the power to heal us. As a clinical psychologist, author, and professor at Northwestern University, I've devoted my life to studying intimate partnerships and family dynamics. On Reimagining Love, I'm here to translate complex clinical topics into tools and takeaways that you can use in your relationships today. If you're ready to develop relational self-awareness and create vibrant and loving relationships with the people who matter most to you, you've come to the right place. I'm so glad that you're here. From wondering who should pay for the first date, to signing a prenup, and all the way through to saving for retirement, there are critical questions about money embedded in every relationship stage. In intimate relationships, differences in how we manage money or how much we make can breed guilt or resentment. And there are a lot of questions that couples have to face. Should we have a joint account or separate accounts? Will we be happier saving up for a big goal or using our money to make memories? Do I need to tell my partner about every splurge? Well, today's guest, Dr. Scott Rick, is here to help. Dr. Scott Rick is a marketing professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, where he has won awards for research and teaching. He holds a PhD in behavioral decision research from Carnegie Mellon, where he was a National Science Foundation graduate research fellow. His research on consumer behavior has been covered in outlets such as NPR, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, and he has published in premier journals spanning marketing, psychology, and economics. And today, he's joining me and us to talk about his first book, Tightwads and Spendthrifts, Navigating the Money Minefield in Real Relationships. In our conversation, Dr. Rick explains how our psychology shapes how we handle money and how the choices we make around money shape our relationships. And the interesting thing is that his research shows that when it comes to money, opposites attract. So what happens when one of you likes to spend and the other likes to save? Well, Dr. Rick's research helps guide us through big and small decisions about money so that you can set up agreements in your relationship that help you avoid scorekeeping and that help you find balance between obsessive saving and irrational splurging, all in the service of prioritizing your happiness individually and as a couple. As I talked to Dr. Rick, I was struck by just how many opportunities there are for increasing our relational self-awareness when we examine how money shows up in our relationships. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Our ideas and our orientations towards spending versus saving are entwined with so many of the topics that we discuss here on Reimagining Love. The lessons we bring with us from childhood and from our past relationships, and how we navigate all kinds of differences in our relationships. I hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed talking to Dr. Rick. Scott, thank you for taking the time to be here with me today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm very excited.
I'm really excited to dive into the topic of money and couples and spendthrifts and tightwads, because my favorite thing to do on this show is kind of get us oriented around an individual difference and how couples have to cross those bridges. It's such the heart of intimate partnership. And so I told you before we started, when our mutual friend Eli Finkel introduced us, I didn't get any further than the title of your book. And I was like, hell yes, I'm going to want to have him on the show, because this is my favorite thing to do, to kind of speak across difference in order to make a deeper relational understanding. So I'm just so glad that you wrote this book, and I'm so glad that I get to pick your brain on this. I know that our Reimagining Love listeners are going to just really, really benefit from this conversation.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and these differences are very common and they must be dealt with. And often they're dealt with kind of imperfectly. And so I thought, well, maybe there's some help that we can offer.
There is, and you've offered a lot of help. And you also selfishly are offering me help because I've been circling around, diving into kind of my next chapter of my work. I really want to understand the intersection of career goals and relationship dynamics. And so that has to do with money and different orientations to work and money. So your book, I know, already has been an amazing resource to me to help me kind of refine my thinking and how do we bring this into that clinical realm around ambition and intimacy. So there's lots of good stuff here for us.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the topic of money and ambition, they're very tied together. And I think that's also inherent in the book. Yes.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. Okay. So before we get too much further, I want to hear a little bit about you and how you are reimagining love in one of your important relationships. So tell us.
Yeah, no, I think I am constantly doing this. This is a daily exercise, I think, as life continues to evolve. And I'm not so much reimagining the feeling or experience of love, but certainly reconsidering how to express and communicate and celebrate it, certainly within my marriage and within the parent-child relationship too, about, it's not just enough to kind of privately walk around with loving feelings towards your partner. They need to kind of understand kind of what you're feeling and how well you kind of understand and appreciate them. And I mean, it shapes everything. It shapes kind of how I phrase questions or how I phrase a text message or the emojis I choose on a text messages, and certainly the gifts I choose. And there's a whole chapter about that. But yes, like what would a loving response to this crisis be, or this uncertainty that someone's having in the home? Yes, it's a lot more nuanced than when it was just kind of me and my wife, Julie, and things were a lot simpler. But now it's all these kids running around and home remodels and books. And I mean, it's just a ever-changing landscape of how to make sure everyone's feeling the love, so to speak. Yes.
I really like that part. It's in the chapter of your book about gifts where you really remind us that rather than, not that there's anything wrong with the cursory, I love you at the end of a phone call, but I really like that just really simple reminder of adding the because. I love you because, and it sounds like that's part of how you are reimagining love is making sure that the people in your life, in your home, hear a bit more from you, like hear it, like that it's really clear and specific to them about what it is about them or what it is about how you feel with them that really is apparent and gets translated.
Exactly. And that's kind of become our Valentine's Day tradition. That's been reimagined. It used to be kind of gifts, and maybe there's a card involved. It's always nice. But in recent years, it's become kind of this David Letterman, like top 10 reasons.
Love a top 10
we
list.
love you. And yeah, and certainly for the kids, we'll still kind of throw candy at them. But that's become a real tradition, and try to keep it fresh and update it with new things over the past year. And it's really important. I learned kind of early on, there are some couples or something like Valentine's Day where they're both like not into it, and maybe that can work for them. That's fine. But if even one person is, I think the whole couple needs to be.
Oh my gosh, I totally agree.
It's like
agree.
Whoever cares the most, that's right. What the couple, yes. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're saying, are we doing Valentine's this year? Like that, that's a very dangerous thing. So yeah, that's been reimagined for us. I think it's been working well.
I also liked what you said about choosing a loving response. It's one of the things that I often find myself teaching is that just that little simple phrase, like, what would love do? In a difficult moment, like what would love do? And how can love guide my voice and my gesture and my next move? Because otherwise other parts of our brain take over and they're not then we're not guided by love. We're guided more by fear, or we're guided more by a desire for control, or, and so that simple reminder of, okay, so what does a loving response look like?
As you say, even like a gesture, like nonverbal responses and faces and just the body language of it all. Yeah, this whole career is maybe much more mindful of these things, I think in a good way.
Yeah, you are a marketing professor who now has just taken himself into this realm of law. I love it. Welcome, welcome to this. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful place.
Here.
Yeah,
yes.
It's a wonderful place for you to bring all of your skills and your deep history of your work. So, okay, we're going to get into this tricky topic of money and relationships, money and marriage. And you cite in the book, that research that indicates that arguments over money are a major predictor of divorce. That's a finding that's pretty well established. So can you start with this big question of what is it that makes money such a uniquely challenging topic for couples to navigate?
Yes. Well, I mean, sometimes it's quite simple that there's just not enough money to go around and it's a survival thing. And I get that. But there are lots of couples who look okay or even good on paper, but still have big disagreements about how to use it, how much to pursue it, like how much should we be working and prioritizing that over other things in life. Is it yours and mine, or is it our money? That's not obvious to a lot of couples. And yeah, what do we mean by our money? Like the $5 you saved as a kid and brought into the marriage, is that 250 of it mine, or how do we deal with this? So there are a lot of non-obvious questions with non-obvious answers out there. There are people who you would think are quite comfortable. You look at kind of how they're living, but if within the household, they don't each feel ownership of the money in the household, you could have someone feeling quite cash strapped, even though they seem to be very comfortable. And so, yeah, these things, they don't get the airing that they deserve within the couple. Many of us aren't raised to kind of talk about these things openly. And there's so much conflicting advice out there that can really kind of shape arguments and create unnecessary arguments. Certainly like the advice around should you have joint or separate accounts? It's like very scattered. And how do you know? There's no right answer here. So it's no surprise to me that it's such a sticking point.
Yeah. It also has this veneer of simplicity because it's dollars and cents. Like there's something so very concrete and tangible about the dollars and the cents. And so I think it's easy then for us to lose how incredibly deep those roots go, right? And they go, as you're indicating, they go back to issues and dynamics and messages we've taken in long before we even met our partner. And so I think when couples act as if we're talking about the $5 here or the $5,000 there, they're missing, right, the deeper things that are coming up around, do I matter to you? Do you respect me? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think so sometimes on the surface, it's about the money, but it's actually, there's an iceberg underneath. I think what some of my research shows is that just whatever financial arrangement you happen to stumble upon can create kind of these new psychological dynamics that would not be there otherwise. And so the money can actually cause good or bad ways that we talk to each other and think about each other. And so it's all tied up. It's a cause and a consequence.
Yes, I loved that point. It's this arrow. I mean, I could see it in my brain when I read it. It's like the arrow goes in both directions. My psychology shapes my relationship with money, but how money gets handled in my home with my partner and my relationships also shapes my psychology. I think that was so important to get us working in that like back and forth direction. It's not just that I bring my money issues into my marriage. It's how, as you're saying, it's the systems my partner and I create. It's the conversations that we have that then reinforce or highlight or create certain beliefs and feelings and experiences inside of me and inside of my partner.
Exactly. And, sometimes these are very intentionally set up and that can be a good thing, but often it's, whoever had the time to run to the bank to set something up and whatever they got talked into there. I was just at the bank the other day trying to set up a new account and I could have easily been persuaded by their pitch. And I was like, no, trust me on this one. I know this is not just about the dollars and cents. Like I'm willing to leave a little money on the table to make sure the relationship is functioning as it should.
Okay, so your book is called Tightwads and Spendthrifts. And where you start us is by helping us get ourselves oriented on where we are on that spectrum, which you say goes from tightwads to, you call them unconflicted consumers, to spendthrifts. And so you've got in the early chapter of the book, which by the way, everybody listening should grab themselves a copy of the book, obviously. But I was wondering if for the purposes of getting our listener kind of oriented to where they imagine they might fall on that spectrum, can you operationalize it a little bit for us? The spectrum from tightwads to unconflicted consumers to spendthrifts.
Yes. So tightwads are people who think a lot about, if I spend the money now, what am I giving up later? I don't want to deprive my future self of shelter or necessities. And those thoughts can make them very anxious about spending money. And it's kind of this cycle of anxiety and thoughts about what you're giving up. And it can make them not spend money on things that they would benefit from, things that they know that they would benefit from. And they kick themselves for not doing it. But just the distress from thinking about spending the money keeps them from buying the stuff. So the brakes on the car work a little too well. And this can be quite frustrating for them and the people around them. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is the spendthrifts. That's where I live. Someone cut the brakes on our car. So we just don't have enough distress about the future. We're very present oriented. And, if we're going to have regret, it's going to be later after we buy it and realize, I probably shouldn't have done that. Whereas the tightwads will not buy things that they need. Spendthrifts will not only buy things they need, but they'll buy things they might need. I might go shopping for dress clothes and say, oh, that's a nice velvet blazer. That would be lovely at a nice holiday party at some point. I'm not invited to it. I probably wouldn't be, but I would want to have it just in case. So it's a very different orientation. And then in the middle, you have these unconflicted consumers who are kind of in a Goldilocks zone, and they have some pain when thinking about spending money, a good amount, not too little, not too much. And they're kind of at peace with what they're spending. And yeah, that's why we call them unconflicted. They're not having this inner turmoil so much.
Mm-hmm. And you're not here to say that the spendthrifts are better than the tightwads or the tightwads are better than the spendthrifts. That there are risks and benefits of both of those, even though they're the kind of more extreme ends of the spectrum, there are risks and benefits of both ways of being, right?
Oh, of course. No, there's no kind of objectively right place to be here. I'm happily married to a tightwad, and I see the virtues and benefits of both ways of going through life. Being a spendthrift, it can be financially risky. Tightwads often look the best on paper in terms of what they've saved and, what they have in the bank, and that's fine. But in terms of happiness, a lot of couples where it's two tightwads, they might have a very peaceful life, but there's a lot of yearning, I would say, kind of like a lot of missed opportunities for fun and adventure. And whereas the spendthrifts might have like amazing stories and memories and experiences. And now you could take these things too far. And certainly many spendthrifts have kind of gone over the deep end. And so, it's a constant balancing of money and happiness and present happiness and future happiness. And I do think change is possible, particularly if you have mismatched spouses. I think they can help each other kind of moderate their tendencies a little bit.
So you advise in the book that we take the survey, it's a 4-question survey, and then that we also take it for ourselves. So I was a good reader and I took it for myself and I took it for my husband and I sent it to him and I had him take it for himself and for me. And I'm kind of cuspy towards spendthrift and he's kind of cuspy towards tightwad. But what's interesting also is that he perceived me as an unconflicted consumer, which I couldn't believe because I feel like I am perceived in this marriage as a spendthrift. And I perceived him as more of a tightwad than he perceived himself. So although he's tighter with money, he was more generous in his assessment of me. It was really interesting. It was we haven't had time yet to kind of unpack it and see what that all means for us. But it certainly feels like we describe all the time in our marriage that I'm the accelerator and he's the brakes. But I have deep respect and gratitude for how he orients towards money. And I also know that he trusts me to not drive us right off the cliff. But it certainly has been the source of tension in our relationship.
No, I mean, a good car needs both, the gas and the brakes. And it can be eye-opening when there are big discrepancies. It sounds like there are some moderate discrepancies in your couple, but it can be useful. Like, oh, okay. I didn't realize you felt that way about, maybe that explains why you insisted on this vacation, or it can help to put some prior decisions in context.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's contextualized around division of labor, which we'll talk about a little bit later. it makes sense. I mean, he has had primary responsibility for bill paying, financial investment strategy, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes sense that he's going to skew a bit more in that direction. Like I kind of get to be spendthrifty because I'm not the one who's opening every single, letter from the bank each month and tracking. So there's a way in which it is, I don't know when we were 23 and got together how our scores would have looked, but I imagine just the way you're saying about how systems shape psychology, I imagine we've kind of fallen more deeply into these patterns as we've had this division of labor over time. Does that land for you?
Yo, of course. And there is research on that, just kind of who happens to assume the role of kind of chief financial officer of the relationship. And you can get this kind of divergence over time and certainly expertise when it comes to money matters. But I think about it as like if someone is spared like shopping for like the family and, new furniture, new kind of big purchases, if I'm spared of that, it might be like a pitcher in a baseball game where they're sitting too long between innings and their arm gets cold and like they kind of lose the muscle memory of spending. And it can kind of, when they do have to do like some optional purchase, it could become like, I'm not sure I want to go through with this. Again, it's the roles that we assume, and that can very much shape our psychology around money.
So what do you think people often don't know or kind of underestimate about that financial component of marriage as they're first setting up their systems together?
It's hard to realize just how much things will change. The new life settings that you will find yourself in, the new income levels that people might assume over the course of the marriage, and the feelings that might come along. You might be pretty similar when you're dating, and then someone makes it big and the other person doesn't, at least in terms of salary. That could be quite uncomfortable if you're still kind of in a separate account world and now you're doing like scorekeeping, like how much do we each contribute? So I think part of it is just a lack of imagination and insight about what's coming down the road and all of the complexities. And so this could be a place where, good books or good advisors or just kind of trusted people in our life can kind of help us map this out. But I think in the throes of love and excitement about approaching marriage, this can be kind of very secondary to people.
It's a reminder that the best thing a couple can do is just kind of approach their relationship with that growth mindset of saying, okay, so we're going to create whatever we're going to create now and the agreements we're going to make now, knowing that we're going to have to keep resourcing ourselves, asking questions, learning, growing, circling back to why we did things the way we did them, how we had to tweak it. So there's really a lot of permission in what you're saying, is that it's not that couples need to do A, B, C, and D in order to be okay for the next 25 years. No, it is about knowing that there's things you can't see that are going to happen.
Yes, thinking about a few of the what ifs and how might that change our dynamic. Is there a way that we can set up our system so that it doesn't degrade the good thing we've got going here? One thing I like about a joint account is it can blur income differences. If we're all in on this, if we're very committed, then I like that. I like blurring income differences. It's just our money. And, a really salient difference in what people are bringing in can be really irritating to both people. It's just, there's a lot of guilt and resentment, and that needs to be thought of early on.
While we're talking about like things that you like about joint incomes, as you said before already, there's a lot of conflicting advice about the best way to share money in a relationship. And some argue that splitting the bills, keeping money separate is a recipe for scorekeeping and conflict. But others say that maintaining financial independence keeps you from fighting about money. So you've done the research. What did you find? And then what guidance for couples emerges from there around sharing money?
Yeah, this was a study with our friend Eli and Deb Small and Jenny Olson, of course.
Of course.
We took couples early on, engaged or newlyweds. They had separate accounts. They were kind of undecided about what to do. And we randomly assigned them to either keep it separate or put it all into a joint account or do whatever you want. And we followed them for 2 years. We would check in. Are you still talking? Do you still like each other? And what we found was that at the end of 2 years, the couples who were prompted to merge their money into a joint account, they maintained that newlywed level of happiness. And everyone else, the other couples in the other condition, you see the natural decline. And that is a very common pattern. And so we think, and we have survey evidence that they did adhere more towards communal norms. It's not you and me, it's us. I help you because you need help, not because I'm prepaying for a favor later. We talk, like we get on the same page about our financial goals. That doesn't necessarily mean like save, save, save. It could mean we can actually afford a vacation here and there, and we can do some fun stuff. And again, I think the income differences, the more you can put that in the background is good. So that's what I like about a joint account. But I like it when it's kind of absorbing all incoming money. You're just kind of laundering the money through this joint account. So it's always ours. There's never like, oh, I get it into my pocket and then I chip in to a joint account. I don't like that.
By doing the study the way that you did, what you highlighted there is that interweaving your lives, becoming a we, not just in your hearts and not just in your domestic life, but in your financial life, it's a key element to becoming a we. But we know that the relationships that are strongest are the ones where that really is that kind of sense of a third identity that we've created together. It's who we are as part of the attachment process and the bonding process and the visioning your future process together. And so what you really highlight in that research is, listen, we can act like money is just sort of over here and it's so separate and so apart from love. But really, that is that process of coming together, creating a communal system around money does reflect then back to the couple that we're in this together.
Talk about reimagining love. Like that could happen at like your local PNC branch. Like that act of, just getting the paperwork in order can kind of confirm and strengthen the love that's already there. Because if you got the wrong system and you have resentment building, and that can degrade a good thing.
Yeah. If we're going to combine our money, it says, I trust you. And sharing money reinforces trust, right? It gives me a chance to see again and again and again that you actually continue to earn my trust. It's like if I keep mine over here and you keep yours over there, I'm telling myself you aren't safe. And I'm not giving you a chance to show me that you're safe and that you can be trusted. And so it's almost in a way ends up kind of confirming our worst case scenarios, I imagine.
Exactly. And, Eli has this idea of connect or protect. Like there are things you do in the relationship to connect with the partner and things you can do to like protect yourself if things go bad. And it's hard to do both at the same time. And so the recommendation to merge is very much on the connect end of the continuum. And I should mention that these couples, they were separate, but they were kind of undecided. They were open to it. There are couples out there who were separate on purpose and were very sure that they wanted to stay separate. And maybe that works for them. They were not for our study. And there are some couples where there's a bad dynamic going, like I work, it's my money. Maybe I give you an allowance. I don't think joint is going to change that. Mm-hmm. Like these recommendations are for people where things are going good, but maybe they can go even better. So if things are already on thin ice, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, go all in. My goodness.
No. That's right. It's not going to fix a trust issue. Yeah. That makes sense. And it may, in fact, put somebody at more risk if there really are well-founded reasons to not be trusting of your partner. Are there times when you really feel like keeping money separate really does make good sense? Like, is there a scenario where you can imagine a couple really enjoying their relationship and really keeping things separate?
Well, this is the irony. So I did that study where it showed that joint was better than separate. I think that joint only is not the way to go. I like joint, again, as the recipient of all incoming money. But I do think on the back end of that, we can each use some of our money without close monitoring by the other person. So we can have separate accounts where we each take some of our money and put it into that separate account. And I think that's okay. Because if you get kind of transaction by transaction transparency, first of all, if you need transparency, you are saying, I don't trust you. There's that. But you can get into unnecessary arguments over little things. We're all convinced that, if you avoid buying the lattes, you can become rich and the math doesn't work out. But if I see like latte, latte, latte.
And there's so much
Yes.
sadness. There's so much sadness
I
without a
know.
latte.
Like, oh, you don't need that. Like, yes, I do. I need to get away from my colleagues for 20 minutes and go down to Starbucks. And
That's right. Just give me a moment.
so there's that. There's also like, we might have different interests or hobbies or passions. And my wife is a needle pointer. I don't understand what all that costs. There have been times when I've stumbled upon a price tag and it's surprising. I wouldn't have guessed anywhere near that number, but it's not hurting us, in the big picture. So I don't need to know all that. And if I'm looking over her shoulder, she's not going to enjoy that. It's going to make her hide or make her just self-conscious, and there's no need. There's no need. So as long as we both have kind of a general understanding of how the household is doing, I say the details can just be available upon request. And hopefully the requests are kind of few and far between.
Is this what you call financial translucency?
Yes. So there's a lot of push for financial transparency in relationships. Some people are very insistent about this, that everything needs to be out there. But I say financial translucency is better, where we just kind of have an impression of what everyone's up to. I know you've taken X dollars per week or month, and what you do with that, that's between you and your checkbook and
your
your
higher
therapist.
power.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's good enough. That's the right balance for couples. Like, we know we're not going over the deep end, but we're not being unnecessarily puritanical either about this stuff.
It's another trust building exercise or practice, just in the same way that sharing my money with you builds trust. Knowing that I take some of my money over here and knowing that you take some of your money over there, and we don't really ask and we don't really tell, that's another kind of trust. It says that you don't need me, as you're saying, over your shoulder in order to make good choices. That is conveying a kind of trust.
I do think there should be an openness. Like, if you would like a second pair of eyes, of course, I'm here. Let's talk. Or if one of us senses that maybe we do need to tighten things up a little bit, I think a first step is like, we each do a self-audit. Like, I trust you to look through and identify where you can kind of fine-tune things. And we just need to hear from each other. I did that. So I trust you to kind of look things over and say, okay, I saw, you don't need me saying you don't need that. But again, there's openness if that's desired, but that's not the default plan.
And that we like self-monitoring more than other monitoring. So if I can go to Todd and say, hey, just so you know, I was thinking about doing this and I pulled it back and did this instead, like, that's a kind of self-monitoring that's important, especially probably for the spendthrift partner to be able to say, you don't need to look over my shoulder. I'm thinking about this. I'm kind of holding myself accountable for my choices.
So yeah, I mean, it's the high trust, high risk approach, but I think that's where the greatest happiness and well-being lives.
I want to go back to what happens when love bridges difference and a tightwad and a spendthrift fall for each other, as they do. You said that your research has found, in fact, that this is an area where particularly opposites do attract, and that we do tend to be pretty likely to marry somebody on the opposite end of the scale. And then, as we were saying before, the systems we set up may take us even further into those domains, even though people say their ideal partner would spend the way that they do. So we don't necessarily walk our talk, huh?
Yeah, in terms of who we want ideally, it is a very common thing to say someone like me, and that's very sensible in terms of a response. But I think someone like me is not always good to kind of confront in reality, particularly if they're showing or displaying something that I don't love about myself. If I'm self-conscious about how I handle money, I see someone with my problem, it just shines a really uncomfortable spotlight on the issue. Like, ugh, is that the way I am? Let's say I'm a nail biter and I'm really embarrassed about being a nail biter. And then I see someone else, it's like, oh, is that what I look like? Oh, so I'm kind of turn away from that and turn towards someone who approaches it very differently. And I think it's kind of fun and fascinating at first. But as circumstances change and you get yourself into new contexts, it can be a little dicier.
Yeah, the thing that was a source of attraction then becomes a source of challenge. So What are the kinds of cycles that you see spendthrifts and tightwads getting into? And what are some of the ways that the research shows we ought to be managing those cycles?
I think one common pattern is that there are a lot of disagreements over whether or how much to spend on all kinds of things. The tightwads win a lot of battles. They will say no, no, no. But a no is just like the money's not spent yet. The no is just the start of a conversation. Eventually, the spendthrift will find their moment. And the tightwad will say, fine, okay, you win. And so the spendthrifts win the war. And so a mismatched couple looks a lot like a two spendthrift couple. Like you just need one spendthrift in the house to like get a spendthrifty house. And so it's actually asymmetric as to they're both frustrated with each other, but the tightwad is usually more frustrated with the spendthrifts. Because again, decisions to spend are a lot more permanent than decisions not to spend. Like you might decide not to spend on Monday through Friday, but I might get you on a Saturday, find you in a weak moment and it's spent, it's done.
Or just wear you all the way down to the nub. I mean, I've got a chair that I want to recover now, and it's been a no. It's been this doesn't make sense, but I know I'm just gonna.
That's right.
I will grind him down.
Yes, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. It's gonna be done.
That's right. I'm a patient woman.
Exactly. Yes, spendthrifts. That's one place where we're very patient. So yes, this is where I love accounts that minimize attention to what a partner is up to. Certainly a spendthrift partner. If I just know that, okay, I know you're using a certain amount of dollars per budget cycle, week or month. Okay, I'm at peace with that. If I saw the actual purchases you're making, I might be like, oh, no, don't do that. But usually you don't need to know that. Again, that one critical trip to the bank can make a big difference for these mismatched couples.
And is it also vital for the spendthrift partner to have a practice of reminding themselves how admirable it is to be mindful, to be discerning about choices, to kind of remember all of the kind of appealing features of somebody who knows how to manage their urges?
Yes, of course. And that's why I reminded myself of the book. I was like, I need to put a in praise of tightwads section. Like there is something very generous to your future self and your kids and just kind of they're being very nice to a future version of themselves and the couple and the family. And that's important. We need someone to look after these future people. But it's about finding the balance, of course. I'm very happy to have kind of a tightwad perspective available in the house. And I'd love if we could just kind of come together a little bit, merge a little. And that's what good couples do. They kind of help to bring each other in from the edges.
One of the things that I know really has helped me with my tightwad partner is knowing that even though he prefers to not spend on items, materialistic items like recovering chairs in our home, he really is there to spend on experiences, tickets to a concert, trip, special dinners. And when I read the chapter in your book about parenting, and you really say that on material stuff, the tightwad ought to have the upper hand. On experience stuff, let the spendthrift run the show. That really is your guidance, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I'm happy to hear that. I think my wife, Julie, has the same flavor where she's very open to experiences, and that's a good thing. And I think that can be a good way to find balance, just based on the research that there are a lot of like new, shiny material goods that can be very exciting at first and just don't deliver a lot of happiness over time. And so there, I would say, certainly let the person with the more conservative perspective on spending, let them win the disagreements. But boy, when it comes to kind of memories, particularly if they're kind of shared experiences with family, there you do want to kind of roll the dice a little bit and kind of go for it. And it's just so important for so many reasons, just not just the experience, but the anticipation of it, the stories afterwards. And like, if you think about where do we really learn about each other? I don't know. Is it the day-to-day conversations where we're saying, oh, who's going to let in the refrigerator repair person? It's often on these adventures.
All right, 2 more things we got to cover before I let you go. And looking at my notes here like, oh God, okay, here's where I want to go next. So when you're talking about sharing money, back to that topic, You cite a finding that partners are in the same tax bracket only about 40% of the time. So I want to talk about the implications of that. So when there's a significant discrepancy between how much I earn and how much my partner earns, what are some of the ways that dynamic is ripe for conflict, and what do we know about how to mitigate
Yes.
the impact there?
Yes. You don't just get income differences because I'm working and you're not. We might both be kind of very successful in our fields, but the fields have different pay ranges, or you might be way more successful, but mine just pays better. And it's just ripe for guilt and resentment. And I do think the psychological money laundering is a good approach here where it's just ours as soon as it comes into the household. It's never mine first, and then I give you access to it. We all have symmetric, immediate access to all incoming money. The person who earns less often feels like they're borrowing or have to ask permission, and that's what you want to get so far away from. And I think the account structure can play a big role in that. But of course, you need everyone to buy into it and understand that even if you earn more, you don't have more of a say over how it's used. It's ours.
Yeah. And somebody who really is getting stuck there, I mean, that's really a place probably to have some psychological therapeutic support to dig in there around like what is the sort of family of origin stuff that's getting in the way. Because if what you are able to say to us clearly is that psychological money laundering really is the path towards a healthy, stable, sturdy relationship, somebody who can't get themselves there really needs to take a look at, okay, so what's blocking me, right? What's blocking me from doing the thing? I'm sure that you have story after story, people who really did witness all kinds of financial traumas growing up and financial infidelities and abuses around money and all of that. So we come into our money issues, our money shtick for very, very, very good reasons. But if you're able to show us, like, listen, this is the path that we know is most helpful and most useful and most beneficial for couples, and you can't get yourself on that path, then you need to really look at what's getting in the way.
Yes. And those stories and memories that we come in with might just be kind of bits and pieces that we were able to infer if something was not kind of discussed openly or explained. We just I knew they fought about this, but I'm not really sure what the core thing was. And so some exploration with a trained therapist, I think, can be helpful for a lot of people.
Okay, gifts. You have a whole perspective on gifts, and your guidance runs counter to the popular wisdom, which is just ask your partner what they want and get them that. So I would love for you to tell us about the method that you are offering around how to get gifts for our partners, and then specifically the relationship you see between gift getting and sacrifice and why that matters.
So I understand the advice. It's very much driven by efficiency concerns, like, oh, just avoid disaster, ask what they
Right.
want and get them that.
Right.
And you do avoid these instances where you get your spouse like a vacuum cleaner or like something like totally not thoughtful or meaningful. But we often aren't saying I love you because we're not often articulating why it is that we love and appreciate our partner. And so these gift giving occasions are these crucial moments to reveal what we see and understand and appreciate. And so if you just go out and retrieve the requested item, well, I know you're willing to please me, but do you love me? I don't know. You're willing to put out fires, but I don't know if you love me. And so this is why I say don't ask directly. I say, you got to learn more about their kind of inner psychological world. What are they excited about? What are they nervous about? Hopes and dreams, goals, plans, interests, new hobbies they'd like to take up. It's not something you can do on Christmas Eve. It takes time. It takes, I suggest like there's these 36 questions that lead to love. It's usually used with strangers to kind of get them close quickly. But I think even in a marriage, you could use a refresher on some of these items. And some of the questions reveal answers that would be helpful in selecting good gifts. So it's all about kind of camping out in their kind of inner psychological world and exploring that. So I think that's one big piece. Another big piece is the sacrifice. So a good gift requires the appearance of sacrifice. I need to know that this wasn't easy for you to pay for or find or obtain in some sense. And so if you know I'm a spendthrift and I'm spending money kind of loosely, and I go out and buy you something expensive, like a new iPad, well, it's nice, it's expensive, but I do this kind of thing all the time. I just bought myself more of the same. It was no big deal to me. So if I want to sacrifice, I need to come up with something creative, make something, find something, track something down, really do something unexpected that takes time and effort and thought. Whereas a tightwad, it's a little different. Certainly the gift still needs to be thoughtful and well chosen, but when I get an expensive gift from my wife, I'm like really flattered. Like I know that was not easy for
That
you.
was not
Yes,
easy.
that's a sacrifice.
She stretched.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Didn't even know you knew about that store, had even heard of it. So that's very flattering from her. So it's not just about kind of what the gift is. It's kind of what do we know about the person giving it? What was easy for them? What was hard for them? It's all kind of interpreted through that lens.
Well, I love that you're bringing back the word sacrifice. I think it's a word that I don't think we're using the word sacrifice enough when we're talking about intimate relationships these days. I think it's because there's a lot of fear of losing ourselves in relationship, a lot of talk about self-abandonment. And so I think this is a really, really cool way to talk about sacrifice. There's no loss of self. There's no loss of esteem. There's no loss of regard in this. It is saying, I see you, I get you, and I'm stretching myself as a demonstration of my desire to invest in this thing that we're building together and refining together. So I think that's a really neat place to challenge people to play with that idea of sacrifice that is actually an expansion of the self rather than a diminishment of the self.
And by the way, who doesn't want to be known as a beautiful gift giver? Like that's another identity I'd love to walk around with. And there are only so many occasions. It's not a daily thing that you have to continually but there are these moments and they're not going anywhere. And so let's make the most of them and let's get it right.
It's kind of like what you're saying in the beginning about Valentine's Day, is that we really can use these moments, these dates on the calendar as reminders to ourselves and to our partners that love is a verb, that there are things that we enact, that we think about, that we plan for to help our partners feel loved by us. And it's easy for that stuff to get lost in the day-to-day grind and work stress and et cetera, et cetera. So in that way, can the date on the calendar then be an invitation and a challenge to put your relationship, put your partner way up at the top of the list and do some anticipating and planning on their behalf?
Exactly. I should also mention surprise is a big thing. And so, you could set up an app to like randomly prompt you like 6 times a year, like, would today be good for a gift? And maybe it's not. And you just kind of flick it away. But maybe you end up with 1 or 2 kind of surprise gifts and just little things to delight your partner. And, they're not expecting anything. So you don't have to do anything wild. I mean, this is why we have wrapping paper. Like surprise is another essential component to this stuff.
Oh, Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Reimagining Love and to unpack and explore all of this with us.
Alexandra, thank you. I've loved our conversation.
It's been really cool. So tell us where we can we'll, of course, put links in the show notes of where to go and get your new book, Tightwads and Spendthrifts, Navigating the Money Minefield in Real Relationships. But what else? How else can people get to know you?
Well, I really like my Instagram handle. I just started that. It's at Likely Shopping, also on TikTok. The more boring one on Twitter, I'm at Scott Ian Rick. And then, scottrick.com has all my papers and all the research that the stuff was based on.
That's great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for writing this book. I think it's a necessary addition to the work that's out there because it's not quite, it's not a money it's not a couples and money make a plan book, but it just sits in just the most important place in the field. I think it's gonna be very beneficial for couples to pick up and work through together. And I think that what you've done is taken some of the fear and the sting and the taboo out of this conversation by very, very seamlessly weaving together money, well-being, love. Like you present it all in a very disarming way that I think is going to help couples come into these conversations and keep having these conversations in a hopeful, positive, creative way. So thank you. Your voice is really important.
Oh my gosh, that's so nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rick, for joining me here on Reimagining Love. To learn more about Dr. Rick's really, really wonderful book, Tightwads and Spendthrifts, Navigating the Money Minefield in Real Relationships, you can find the link in the show notes. I want to hear from you. How does money show up in your intimate relationships? Send me a DM or email me at info@dralexandrasolomon.com or use the link in the show notes to send me your thoughts. Until next time, be well. Do you have a relationship question that you want answered on the show? Visit reimagininglove.com to send in a written or audio question. Questions can be about intimate partnerships, family relationships, friendships, you name it. If you're looking for more love and relationship content, you can find me on Instagram at dr.alexandra.solomon or visit my website, dralexandrasolomon.com, where you'll find my blog as well as the Intimate Relationships 101 e-course based off of the popular class I teach at Northwestern University. Thank you for listening and see you next week here on Reimagining Love.